Hunt with passion. Never stop casting. Chase the dream. Welcome to Season 7 of Musky Mastery Outdoors, brought to you by Joe Bucher Outdoors, #1 in big game fish products. Recon Boats, made by craftsmen, built for fishermen, and by Great Lakes Potato Chips. Snack happy, every chip, every bag. Hey everybody, what's up, and welcome back to another Musky episode here on the Musky Mastery YouTube channel. Well, folks, I cannot thank you enough for joining us tonight, whether you're watching on YouTube or whether you are listening on the Musky Therapy podcast. Regardless, whether you're watching a clip of this on Facebook or Instagram, we don't care where you watch and listen to our content. We're just grateful for your support, your love, and hopefully your enjoyment of our product. And in this very special whiteboard vlog, and this is, of course, it's amazing that I'm actually going to say this. This is the 7th installment on the Mastering Muskies whiteboard vlog series. And tonight we are covering, yet again, a very, very special topic. And this is Fishing Weed Cover 101. It seems that a lot of folks are interested in how to step their game up in, of course, weed cover, whether it be slop cover or whether it be more traditional, early season cabbage fishing, or you name it, we're going to cover it, whether it's sandgrass, we're going to cover that in this episode. It's very exciting stuff. Everybody fishes weed cover, so hopefully everybody has something that they'll be able to take away from, tonight's episode. So, as always, we're going to start with a little bit of listener Q&A. So, again, if you're new and this just so happens to be the first whiteboard vlog video that you're clicking on here on the Musky Mastery YouTube channel, welcome to the Musky Mastery family. And as we start all of our whiteboard vlog videos here, we do a little Q&A. So, in the comments section of each one of these videos, you can post a question, a follow-up question to something that usually it's something that I'm talking about. It does not have to be, for example, if you post a question in this video, does it have to be about fishing weed cover for muskies in this episode? No, it can be on a previous episode that we've, some topic that we've covered, one of the various topics. It can be on, something you've seen on one of my videos, or maybe something you're just curious about. Anything's fair game here at the Musky Mastery YouTube channel. So here we go. Here's a question from Andy, okay? He said, generally, what is the minimum and maximum distance from the lure to the end of your rod tip during the figure eight? Okay, that's question one. Also, is there a minimum number of figure eights you should always do after each cast? And if you have a follower, do you keep figure eighting until you cannot spy on them anymore? So first of all, Andy, thank you for your question. There's a lot to unpack there. As I'm kind of looking around for my eraser, I think we'll be fine. We'll figure this out. So first of all, generally speaking, if this is the lead guide on your St. Croix, something like this, okay, and you've got your bait caster here. Look at that excellent drawing there, okay? I would say when I am figure eighting, going into traditional figure eight, and most of you know, if you've listened to this podcast long enough, there's my 80-pound test JBOB sprayed. I am tying, here's my lure, so I guess we'll just have a, I'm going backward here. Here we need the leader, of course, first. We're not tying directly to the lure. So I'm, of course, tying my beast braid. Here's a little barrel swivel here to the end of an 11-inch musky leader. Okay, this is an 11-inch steel leader. The last three digits of the SKU is 989, so we call it the old 989 musky leader made by JBO. Then I'm going to, the no BS system here. Here's your blade. Okay. But this is an 11-inch leader. So really when I am figure eighting in most circumstances, I really have, let's say, about a foot, 12 inches of line. Maybe I've got 12, 13, 14 inches. But I'm telling you, Andy, really there is literally a foot of line a foot of line, there's a foot between the tip of the lure and the tip of my musky rod. So really, it is just a leader's length, okay? Actually, I'm just gonna really make sure that I dial this in. Usually what that means is I have about 1 inch of line here and then the rod tip, okay? The reason for that is pretty simple from the standpoint of the more line that you allow out from the tip of your lure to the tip of the rod, the harder it is to make figure eights. And the lure is literally gonna be lagging behind as you're maneuvering with your 8 or 9 or 10-foot musky rod, or a 7-foot musky rod for that matter. The more line you have out, the more your lure is going to lag behind and the harder it is to manipulate. So you want to avoid, in most circumstances, we're going to talk about a couple different things here, but have a short amount of line out. Is there a minimum number of figure eights you should always do after each cast? I mean, the minimum number is 1. Like, you need to do, highly recommended, don't just do the old L. A lot of folks, we're all guilty of this to a certain extent. We're all guilty of doing the old L, and if you everybody probably knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about an L. Here's the old 895T. I mean, you got that lure tracking into the boat, come in, swing it out, and then they'll pick it up and finish right there, okay? Again, I would highly recommend coming in and doing a complete figure eight at boat side, okay? So try, if you can, not to finish with a lazy L. There are plenty of horror stories. I've got them. Everybody's got them. There's a couple YouTube shorts out there that are just tough to watch of guys that are, and gals, that are just looking at their cell phone, or they're just getting lazy and they miss a really, really big fish that comes in and they screwed it up because they only did half a figure eight. So bottom line, always do a figure eight. There are certainly some spots, Andy, and everybody out there listening, that I would recommend doing, like, so for example, on my best spots, when I'm in stained water, I recommend a lot of times doing minimally 2 on certain spots. If I'm in a really big fish spot where it has a history of producing lunkers, just in situations where sometimes this is musky fishing, when they just have, the spot has a history of muskies popping out of nowhere when I'm least expecting them, which is probably all the time. But point being, there are some spots that I will do 2. Or if I'm on a spot, for example, where I know I'm going back and I'm targeting a muskie that has already followed, of course, in those situations, I may do multiple figure eights when I know I'm in the presence of a fish. Doesn't matter how big it is, right? Big or small, we're going to take them all, okay? So that, of course, varies a little bit. And, if you have a follower, do you keep doing figure eights until you can't spy on them anymore? Yeah, there's definitely a point when you're figure eighting a muskie and let's say it darts off. Now, a lot of times with modern technology, with our side imaging or our 360 or your forward-facing sonar, you're going to be able to see where this fish goes. At least you might have a general idea where they're going. If you don't have any of that technology, a lot of times you'll be able to see them move off. Regardless, it pays big dividends to you if you continue to figure eight after the muskie's gone. A lot of times there's multiple muskies that follow. I've many times had 2 muskies follow at one time, so a lot of times there could be another one just under the boat. A lot of times when they leave the vicinity where you think they're gone, okay, I was just checking to make sure we're recording. All of a sudden we're in and we're like, oh boy, we better have that red light blinking. They will leave the area and then oftentimes come back and strike. So a lot of times when you think, one of my best, early June muskie segments that I produced in the 2024 season, I did 5 figure eights before that beautiful muskie showed up in 8. And it was, it came in and then it was gone, and I figure eighted once, twice, 3, 4, 5, and then bam, she shut out of nowhere. Had I done a two and out routine and said, oh, she's gone, probably wouldn't have been a muskie segment that you're going to see in season 8. So, you have to just kind of feel it out, but always do 1 on really good spots. You can do 2. And when you're figure eighting when a fish is in your domain, there's really no limit to how many you should do. A lot of times you want to go shoot a cast back right away. If you see that muskie, literally is 20 feet away on, let's say on 360, you can see she shot off, on the starboard side, then sometimes it's safe to just pull out and go after that fish. But okay, hope that answers your question, Andy. Keep them coming. Thank you. This is a question from Joe. You were talking about hook sets in the figure eight. When do you set the hook? Is it when you feel the fish or what? Secondly, and boy, is that a good question, Joe. You are really on your A game here. Secondly, at what point do you cast back with a different lure if they don't bite on the 8? Okay, first of all, this first question is absolutely a tremendous question because as a guide in northern Wisconsin, boy, is this a topic of conversation on the boat? And I have some long time clients. Adam and Steve, if you're listening or watching, you know the situation I'm referring to. When do you set the hook when a muskie's following in the figure eight? Okay, so here we have the muskie coming into our figure eight here, and it starts to go through the traditional figure eight maneuver with us. Okay, the general inclination that most folks have, and this still is a truthful statement, when you feel the bait stop, all right, you feel some sort of resistance, okay? I mean, let's say I've got the old Slop master here, okay, and you feel the bait, I don't know, do something weird, okay? Usually it's stop, a little resistance, just slam the fish. No mercy, hook set, rod buried down, and hammer them, okay? But here's something that I want to bring to everybody's attention. There is something that I like to refer to as the silent strike, okay? And that is when a muskie is following, said Slop master here, okay? And instead of feeling that violent strike, what you're going to have is the muskie simply is moving with the lure here, and it overtakes the lure and keeps swimming. So because the rod is big, because the line, I mean, again, our rods, modern day rods, you can feel almost anything. But point being, sometimes that muskie strike is so subtle and the fish literally gobbles the bait and keeps going that you don't feel a thing, okay? This is not uncommon, okay? And in these circumstances, it becomes a visual game as far as the strike. So yes, is it a feel thing? Do you feel the muskie strike and set the hook? Of course. Are there just as many? I'd say, is it 50%? 40% of strikes where you don't feel the strike? You, in fact, just see the strike? How many times am I calling out to clients, you got her, dude, set the hook? A lot. You better believe it. A lot. Holy cow. I mean, that is a major thing. So don't forget, your strikes can be visual. They can be the silent strike. And Joe says, what point do you cast back with a different lure if they don't bite? Well, the first thing that I'm going to generally do, even though I got my wife's like, why do you need so many rods? Well, of course, I want to have them ready to go and rigged and everything like that. Although Steph understands. I'm not trying to, it's certainly not a not a feisty comment, but sometimes people ask, hey, why do you have 6 musky rods in the boat? Well, why do you play the golf with 14 clubs, okay? Well, it's because I'm not going to use the same club for every shot. I'm not going to use the same rod for every lure and technique, and I happen to want some ready to go when I want to throw a cast back. But that first cast that I make is generally going to be with the same lure the muskie followed it. I'm going to change the angle often and just rip it. Get a good cast in there and really do something quick right when I know where that fish is. A lot of times I want to go right at that fish. If the fish doesn't hit on my first cast, then I'm going to throw a different lure back at it. Maybe it's a baby shallowrator. Been showing off the old Wonder Bread color here. Maybe it's just a classic baby shallowrator. And you're going to go twitch it, pause it, see if you can trigger a strike. These are all possibles, okay? So, Joe, I hope that answers your question. Keep them coming. Thank you very much. Okay, here's a really good question from Dean. He says, hey, any other ideas for seeing the lure location better when the lure is entering the figure eight in cloudy water, heavy chop, etc.? So let me reach down here into my bag of tricks. One of the things that you can certainly do when you're in those situations. Here's a Mag Slop Master tinsel here. This was, my friends, look at that big old meat hook on there. That trailer hook, you can pick those up. JBO makes those trailer hooks if they get beat up or you have to cut a hook. Okay, one of my what was I talking about? I was talking about one of my all-time tricks here when I'm fishing. You guys know I fish a lot of stained water. Use a bright blade. Like, that's the first thing. If you're having trouble seeing a lure in chop, in dark colors, just use a blade that feels good, of course, but that you can see it. It's a visual thing, right? That's super important. But really, this is one of those things that I'm gonna urge you, Dean, and everybody else. It honestly, in my humble opinion, becomes just a time on the water thing. I don't know, what analogy, might be better. I'm thinking about golf. I was talking about clubs in the bag. How do I know how far to swing the club back when I'm going to hit a 50-yard approach shot? How do I adjust that when I'm only out 40 yards? It's a feel game, okay? You develop over time how much force to apply with the club, or how fast or how short of a backswing is going to produce a 40-yard shot versus a 50-yard shot. Bear with me on the analogy here. When you are reeling a blade in, when you're reeling the Mag Slop Master in, and let's say you can't see the blades, it becomes a feel game where, of course, most of us here right off the bat could agree with me that the feeling of a lure at the far end of a bomb cast feels a lot different than when you've got 5 feet of line out. So what you want to start psychologically, you want to think about this as you cast during the day. When you can see your lure, you want to make a visual and then mental reminder of what does it feel like when the lure is 10 yards out. What does that feel like? What does it feel like as your lure goes from 10 yards, you're 30 feet out, and then all of a sudden you go to, getting close to entering that figure eight. There is a sensation there with every lure. The more you cast that lure and the more you think about how does that feel, the better you're going to get at making that transition. The reason I know this and the reason I feel like I'm a good person to be able to speak about this is because when I'm night fishing, I can't see anything. And if you go back now, and Dean, go take a look at some of these to see if I'm pulling the, wool over your eyes here, and I'm not. I'm telling you the truth. Go listen to those videos. You're not going to hear any clanking or any of this, goofy stuff going on at night, because at night, once I take about 10 casts at night in total darkness, I get that feeling. And I can enter that figure eight without seeing the lure in total darkness almost every time. Is it perfect? No. Occasionally I'll click the lead guide, but it's a feel game. And so the more you think about it, the more you make it a game for yourself during the daylight, unless you're night fishing, try to feel it out, and that's going to help you. So, Dean, I hope that answers your question, and keep them coming. Thank you. Here is the last of our Q&A questions from Dave. He said, hey, what is your preferred method boat side for topwater and glide baits / jerk baits, twitching boat side rise or the figure eight? Do you like the boat side rise or the figure eights? This is a great question, Dave. Thank you so much. I kind of mentioned this at some point, I think, on the figure eight episode. Here we've got the old top rater in Psycho Frog. And so anytime I've got a topwater, which is part of the question here, I am a subsurface kind of guy. I like to take this lure underwater with the power of the rod and do my figure eight just the same that I would do a figure eight with a 700 bucktail, okay, or some sort of blade, okay? I just find that for topwater, if you look at loons, you look at ducks, you look at muskrats and otters and beavers, what are they all doing, right? What are they all doing? They're all diving under the surface. When a loon sees an eagle fly by, what do? They dive under the surface. So when animals are in a situation where they're uncomfortable, they're being chased, or they're threatened, a lot of times they're diving. So I think that's a natural thing to do when you're figure eighting. Now, let's say you've got a glide bait. Now here I've got a glider in Psycho Frog. This is actually a walk-in raider, so it's the topwater version of the glider. You can tell because it's got these neat little red eyeball inserts there, so you can kind of tell the difference. But pretend this is a glide raider, same body, different weighting. In this case, I'm not going to take this lure that's super erratic and do a traditional figure eight with the glider, okay? In these situations, I love to do what's called the dead stick. And the dead stick is simply just, once the lure is, and you know what, I'm gonna do this with red to kind of differentiate here on my board. Instead of going into the figure eight here, which you can see in purple, I'm going to stop the lure right in this zone here, okay? I'm gonna stop retrieving, and yes, even if Mr. or Mrs. Muskie's right behind me here, I will stop the figure eight there, and I'm going to work the lure side to side. I'm going to work it left. I'm going to work it right, or whatever, left, right. I'm going to work it back to the right. I'm going to work it back to the left, and I'm just going to work this lure in position in this area, okay? And I'm just going to try to let the lure kind of work its way down the water column, and then I'll boom, 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 boom. I'll work it back up. And then I'll let it kind of float down, and I'll glide it to the side. And I'll kind of leave it there. And a lot of times I have found that dead sticking, I guess you could call it the boat side, the death pause. A lot of people will talk about that with something like the old, here's a Grape Flame 7-inch shallow raider. So a lot of times I do figure eight my shallow raiders traditionally, like a bucktail or a spinnerbait or something like that. But I do occasionally, you can get creative. Let's say if you can increase the speed, you can get this real erratic. You can bring it in, stop it, and utilize the buoyancy of that lure to rise right back up. So the options are endless, and that's what makes this sport so much fun. Is you can take something and just go, you can continue to experiment with it and see if you catch fish doing it. If you don't catch fish doing it, do something else. So, all right, guys. Well, here we go. I'm super excited again. Fishing Weed Cover 101, Mastering Muskies, the 7th edition here, and let's start things off with a very basic intro question. Why does weed cover or weed structure hold muskies? Like, what's the big deal about it? Well, first of all, you got to remember that, weed structure provides an ambush point for species like muskies that make their living killing and eating other things. So when you have I'll just keep our muskie here. When you have, weeds here, and the muskie can, of course, hide behind weeds, okay, and in and around and just in little patches and thickets and things like that. This provides like a natural ambush point. Like, this is a place where muskies can hide, and then when they see another fish or an animal make a mistake and pause a little bit too long, they'll come out and grab them. So it's also, if you think about this, this is just such a great place. It's a forage refuge. It's a forage refuge. So you'll have various species. It's a great spot for all sorts of little critters, whether it's golden shiners or, different suckers, bluegills. You're going to have some bigger species mixed in here, of course. You're going to have your panfish and your walleyes in there. You know, look, so it's a place with just full of life. So it's holding prey items. Muskies are going to go target these areas to eat. So that's one thing, right? And it also offers an escape, you know, for, you know, muskies as far as, you know, getting away from boat traffic and fishing pressure. A lot of times, and we know this is the case, where do they go? Well, they bury themselves in the weeds. Instead of being up here, you know, muskies might sink down, you know, deeper here and sit here out of range from you. And it's very difficult when the weeds are thick to get a lure over that fish's face. So we'll talk about that as we go. But yeah, it's also a place for digestion. So muskies will oftentimes seek out shallow areas, some weed beds to digest their food. So there's a lot of opportunities here for muskies. I would say, you know, primary one is feeding, of course. One thing that's definitely overlooked by folks is the classic heat and warmth that weeds generate. Of course, this can be problematic when you've got exotic invasives like Eurasian water milfoil, where they actually generate a lot of heat and can raise water temperatures on certain bodies of water where we have, like, you know, where there are major issues. But it's also a really, really good thing in the early season where, you know, you've got, you know, UV, ultraviolet, you know, radiation from the sun, you know, penetrating the water surface. And of course, weeds are usually, you know, darker in color. They'll absorb a lot of heat energy from the sun, and it will heat the water around that patch of weeds. So dark patches, weed patches can attract fish just simply because of the warmth, and then it doubles as a place where they can find food as well. So, right. Okay. What is important about how you should approach fishing weed structure? Good question. Well, first of all, how you approach fishing weed structure is largely dependent, and there's a couple different ways to cut this piece of pie, but largely dependent on the lure you're fishing or the strategy you're implementing. But bottom line, what's important about how you should approach fishing weed cover, okay? Bottom line, reduce the number of fouled casts while effectively presenting the lure to the muskie, okay? So what that means is, no matter what you're using in weed cover, think about this. What's really important here is that you're able to present a lure to the strike zone, okay? And your goal is to get that lure out of the weed cover and, you know, back to the boat. Now, of course, on the way back to the boat, or the way, you know, or you know, over the structure or on this edge, you're gonna want to, you know, get a hungry muskie to come up and eat this thing, okay? But the whole idea here is that you get that lure in and get it back safe. And of course, along the way, you're trying to get the lure eaten and in the mouth of a toothy critter, okay? But you know, basically you want to think about a couple different things as far as, you know, how you're approaching weed cover, okay? And the bottom line, you know, you want to think about like bucktails, of course. You know, let's say we're here and we're casting just we're casting perpendicular. So if this is the shoreline here, we're casting this way, and a bucktail is going to start here, and it's going to, you know, run above the weed cover and sometimes through the weed cover, but you know, that's your blade, okay? That's your spinnerbait, okay? That's your mag slot master and things like that. You know, these are running above and through the weed cover, and you know, different from in many cases. Where did I put that baby depth raider? You know, a crankbait here. A crankbait could, depending on, now I got too many things in my hand. A crankbait like this baby shallow raider could run above, okay? You could work in many cases with a baby shallow raider or a small shallow running minnow bait like this. You can work above the weeds, okay? But a lot of times you're working that edge, you're clicking and ticking, you're bumping and grinding, and you're making contact with the cover. So a lot of times, ooh, I better put this down while I open up my marker. Those hooks are sharp. Thanks, JBO. A lot of times a crankbait is, twitch down, now use the buoyancy of the lure, dive it down with that run it down with that diving lip, bounce up, run it down, bounce up, now run it down, and now you're, maybe this is this would represent kind of a baby DR where you're, oh boy, like I told you, these hooks are sharp here. Maybe this is your shallow raider here, and now your baby depth raider. If you're working that edge, we're going to talk about edge fishing. You're working this down, and then it's going to C-shape. But there's just the basic idea here. No matter what you're throwing, guys and gals, you want to get it in and get it out safe. Okay, you want to avoid snagging, and that's a really important thing to just consider when you're fishing weed cover. Because the bottom line, right, when any of us have trouble, and think about why I'm bringing this up, okay? When any of us have trouble fishing weed cover, it's usually because you are snagging and bringing weeds in, okay? And I see this a lot when I'm guiding, and I try to always make an effort I'm always making an effort. What I was trying to say is kindly reminding customers every time that lure comes in with weeds on it, it's pretty much a zero chance that you're going to catch a fish on it. Now, that is not to say, have we caught muskies over the years with weeds on lures? Yes, occasionally, but it's not very often. So you really need to consider that. That's the biggest downside when you're fishing weeds is getting snagged, okay? So we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But now let's just talk about this real quick, because now I'm not going to do a full biology lesson. We already did enough with photosynthesis, okay? But here's something to think about. There's a lot of different species of weeds out there, okay? And a lot of folks will say, well, hey, what's the big deal? Does it really matter to think about the different species of weeds? And here's the general idea. Okay, as we move from, and you can go back to, seasonal musky movements whiteboard vlog and take a look and try to connect these dots here. But as we move from ice out, in early spring into spring, so as we move from like May into early June, mid-June, or when we go from fall to ice up, so from turnover and beyond now we go up, now we go to, from let's say, water temps, 50, let's say 60, 55 degrees, and then we eventually make our way to 34, 32 and freezing. I'm looking for the most robust weed structure I can find. And this changes throughout the season. And this is an important thing to think about. There is definitely, when it comes to weeds, and this is not the same, I shouldn't say that. Rocks, rock cover and even timber is also seasonal in its own way. But with weed cover, we see a great amount of seasonality, right? There can be, there's a great determiner of musky location in different types of weed beds based on the species and when it develops and when it dies off, right? Not all weed species last all season long, okay? And it's important to remember that dead weeds, if anything, right, even if they're heat magnets. Dead weeds are heat magnets, but they also provide cover and structure for prey species to hide, okay? So a lot of different things there to think about. That's the same with even invasives like Eurasian water milfoil. It's as toxic as those weeds are, they really do offer space for prey and predator species alike to hang out. And, you just want to think about, for example here, I'll use this. There are various grass species out there, okay, that, let's say from May even to mid-June in northern Wisconsin, when the water temps are, even working their way up into, 70, they are not fully developed and not worth fishing because they're not thick enough a lot of times to hold bait species, all right? But by, the old saying, knee high by the 4th of July, not only is that, the old saying we used to use for corn when we were growing up, but you can think about that for different species of weeds. Don't fish, I personally, at least, I'm not telling you what to do. I don't fish certain weeds or weed beds or grass flats, for example, until they're fully developed and they're holding bait. And then a lot of times those grass flats die off, or certain species of weeds just die off, or they diminish so greatly that you need to move on and look for other types of structure. So something to think about there. Okay, but that's kind of interesting, just in and of itself. Is you think about the seasonality, a lot of this stuff, and how that affects the way that you fish it, how that affects the way that muskies are attracted to it. Okay. Because your best weed flat in July may be toast by October and by mid-October, and that's something you have to think about and strategize when you're looking at your bodies of water and you're thinking about where you're going to allocate your time. Okay, so it's just something to think about. Okay, I'm going to do a little erasing here, and we're going to talk about something that's very, very important. Okay, I'm just going to pull up one thing here. Okay, there we go. Okay, here we go. So we are going to talk about a very, very important topic here, and this is flats fishing versus edge fishing on weeds. Okay, so let's dive in and take a look here. I'm going to try my best. I am going to put our shoreline here. Let's make a nice shoreline here. There we go. And we are going to, I may not cover this whole thing, but we're going to do a little Bob Ross. And let's say we got a nice little sandy area here. And then we've got, kind of mix a musky in here. Then we've got our weed flat here. Let's pretend this is cabbage and coontail and all sorts of stuff here, okay? There we go. That's a happy little weed bed here, okay? And there's another finger here that grows out, okay? And there's maybe a satellite weed patch here. Somebody's saying, hey, I know that spot. Look at that spot. I know that spot. Joe, come here. Call Fatante. There it is. Well, it could be. This is your weed bed. This is your favorite spot here, okay? We've got a muskie holding on the satellite patch there. We got a muskie here on the inside turn. Okay, so maybe I'll make this just a little bit more robust for purposes here. Okay. There we go. Perfect. All right, so flats versus edges. Okay, well, first of all, we're going to talk about just basically just the difference here between flats and edges and why that's important, okay? Now, I guess I should say, I'm looking at my notes here. This is not necessarily like a seasonal issue as much as it is a forage issue, okay? Are muskies holding on flats and edges simultaneously? Of course they are. Are muskies holding in this sandy area between the weed bed and the shoreline? Of course they are. Are muskies holding in the basin behind us way out here? Well, you better believe it. Of course they are, right? So there's muskies holding everywhere, which so it's like how do you make a cast then? Okay, well, right here before I put a muskie in here, we're gonna call so the flat of a weed bed is what I like to call the meat and potatoes of it. So here in the whoops, that's flat. The flat is this, okay? This is the weed flat, okay? This is the big fat section of the weed bed. I mean, this is flat in here, okay? I would call this the weed flat, okay, here, okay? This here, okay, this here is an inside turn. Here's another inside turn. Here's an inside turn, an inside turn. Here's a satellite patch of weeds. Here is a finger. I like to call these fingers. Okay, here's a finger. It doesn't really look like the word finger, but that's what it says. Here's a finger. Okay? So your approach to these spots can vary a little bit. Okay? So we're going to talk about that. Okay? So I'm not going to use this big boat here because I want to pretend. Let's pretend this flat is big. Okay? Let's pretend this weed flat is massive. Okay? Because you're going to see here that my boat, I'm going to make our boat small here, okay? So let's pretend, let's make a bird's eye view here. We're gonna erase the word flat here so I can kind of make this a little bit more. Okay, so here's the flat, okay? And our boat's going to be this red thing that slightly resembles a boat here, okay? And so when you're fishing a flat, let's say, the one thing that we're really going to differentiate here as opposed to edge fishing, because I'll put our boat here for the edge, is going to be here. Okay, this will be our boat for our edge, something like that. Maybe we'll erase this in a little bit, but there's the boat. Okay, so when we're flats fishing, one thing that we want to kind of talk about is this, that the boat is positioned inside the edge toward either the center of the structure or toward the shoreline. So you'll see that I'm not out here on the edge, like in scenario, we'll call this flat boat A, okay, and boat B will be on the edge. So when we're in with boat A here, we're up on the flat, okay? And to do this, you really need to be comfortable being surrounded by cover, okay? So you can see that there's weeds. Make an addition to our finger here. There's weeds all around me, okay? And of course that depth changes a little bit. Of course it's shallower in here and it's deeper out here, okay? But point being, you need to be comfortable being up in that cover, okay? There's gonna be cover and structure on all sides of the boat, and it sometimes can make anglers feel uneasy, okay? I'm speaking too personally. When I was younger, flats fishing seemed foreign to me. Like, shouldn't I always be on the edge? No, okay? No, and we'll talk about why, okay? Because, this all comes down to, I forgot to mention this. Why? Why is this okay to not be on the edge? Well, let's say you've got bluegills spawning up here. Let's say they're making, let's say bluegills are making their beds up here. This is a great example. Let's say it's early June, mid-June, and you've got bluegill beds, or smallmouth beds for that matter. Let's say you've got fish that are bedding here, okay? What you're gonna have here in this scenario is, let's say this is early season, you're gonna have migration of bait in and out of these locations, okay? Well, what's that going to do? That's going to take Mr. Musky out here, and that's going to bring them right into the flat, okay? A lot of times, now, are there still going to be muskies hanging on the edge out here? Of course there will. But a lot of times in my scenario here, the whole idea is, why would you fish up in a flat instead of on the edge? Follow the forage. One of the biggest takeaways that you can get from any of my videos is follow the food, follow the muskies, find the muskies, okay? So in this scenario, we're going to be up in this flat because let's just say that this area here, now I'm going to really muck this up, that this area, let's just pretend this is 3 to 5 foot zone. This is where I'm seeing a lot of forage up in this flat. Maybe somebody's going to argue this is the back edge. It's not drawn perfectly to scale, but there's food here. It's up in the flat. It's not out on the deep edge. So we're going to bring our boat into that flat and fish there. One of the things that's really important when you're flats fishing is the use of GPS points. So let's say that I mark a musky, here or something. There's no way to differentiate this. Mark a GPS point, okay? Mark a GPS point here so you know where to come back, okay? Because if you don't have GPS points, it's going to be really hard to come back. Casting in flats, of course, this goes really with both edge fishing and flats fishing, is diversify. You're going to want to, cast in toward your primary, your A spot. Your A spot. But you're also going to maybe fan cast a little bit. You're going to be leading the boat. You're going to have your buddy, your fishing partner casting different areas. But you still want to diversify. And I just guess I'll say this, that flats fishing really just varies. I mean, like on smaller bodies of water where you've got weeds that are real tight to the shoreline, maybe, or it just really depends on the lake and the depth and the water clarity. But a lot of times flats fishing it's a super prevalent technique on big water. So when I'm on bigger bodies of water and I've got giant flats, you are not hugging the edge in those cases. Oftentimes you're up in that flat, okay? So something to think about there. Now, edge fishing, and this is, again, let's say that the bluegills are done spawning here and now they move out and the water's warming up and it's July. Well, a lot of times in those cases, we're going to have forage out here. We're going to have forage more, probably funneled into these little inside turns, and they're kind of hanging on the weed edges. In this case, I'm not going to be casting, this structure here anymore. I'm going to be focusing on this area and this area. Oh boy, my musky got a little red fin there. And this area here and this area here. These are edge spots, okay? This is the deep edge as it now becomes, it slowly tapers off into the main lake basin, okay? For these situations, I really focus on, creating what I like to call probing casts, okay? Probing casts. I am casting up. I'm trying to, as the lead angler here, cast. Okay, so if I tick weeds here, okay, I know the edge is there. If I tick here, I know the edge is there. If I take a cast here and I don't hit weeds, I know that my next cast, I'll try to color coordinate this, my next cast is going to be something like this. So, you're using your lure as the original, as my friend Joe Booker would like to say, the original forward-facing sonar, all right? A lot of times this is best accomplished, you guessed it, with a crankbait, okay? You're using a crankbait here as your probe, right? It's got a diving lip. You're going to hit that structure and you're going to make contact with it. You're going to shake it free and you're going to keep probing, keep picking away at that edge, okay? Crankbaits really excel in this. Can you use spinner baits? Again, I'm using this big old Slop Master, Mag Slop Master. Can you use this? Can you maybe slow roll this and drop that rod tip and just kind of careen it and peruse it and bruise it right through that weed cover? Well, that was a nice twist of words there. Careen, peruse, and bruise right through that cover. Yeah, you can. Crankbaits, though, do a really good job. Here's the Baby DR in Hot Perch. Definitely going to be getting some water time on that color this season. So yeah, there's still, in this case, which is kind of funny, you're like, are you casting the flat here? Well, yeah, I'm still making perpendicular casts, but when I'm truly focusing on the edge, I'm making more what we'll call parallel casts. So if this is the shoreline here, these casts are running parallel to the shoreline, whereas if I cast into the flat here, I'm casting perpendicular to the shoreline. Now, the difference still between edge fishing and flats fishing is this is not drawn to scale. When your weed bed is giant, you many times, in fact, when you're on big bodies of water, you're here on the edge. You cannot, with the longest Brett Favre bomb, you cannot make it all the way through the flat. So yes, you can perpendicular cast into the flat, which is excellent, and I highly recommend it all the time. But really it comes down to a combination of strategies when you're edge fishing. You're going into the flat, you're working, but again, a lot of times in these situations, I'm probing that edge and I'm ticking away. I'm looking for muskies that are holding kind of a little bit on that deeper edge, okay? And a lot of times that's mid late season when the weeds get so thick in here and so nasty. Sometimes you can't even, the weed cover is so thick you can't go into the cover there. I am going to do a brief drawing over here, I think. I'm going to erase some of our beautiful Bob Ross weed flat here because I think I have an old whiteboard vlog. You might have to dive back in, folks, to season 3. You might have to go back a couple years. But I'm just gonna do a, so let's say this is the flat over here. I'm gonna show you something because I want to talk. I talked a little bit about probing the edge with a depth rater. Okay, so when you're throwing crankbaits at an edge, okay, one thing that I just want to briefly touch on, and I'm gonna do a brief touch on it because of time here tonight, and because I have covered this in some other videos. But I want to talk about, when you're cranking weeds. I keep saying this: click and tick, make contact with the cover. You're throwing that crankbait in here. It plops here, okay? And you're going to dive down and boom, you hit weed cover. Immediately allow for some slack in that line and let that lure float back up. Okay, float out of the snag. You're going to rip that rod. You're going to pop that rod back and forth, whip that slack line back and forth. And you're gonna want that lure to swing back and forth. It's literally swinging back and forth like so. It's throwing clinger weeds. It's diving down, hit cover. It backs itself out of the cover. It literally backs itself right out of the cover. If you do it correctly, that diving lip, look at that diving lip there. It's a shovel, right? It's actually, look, can you see the treble hook behind that? Probably not. Look what's hiding behind it, right? So the treble hook hides behind the diving lip. It protects the treble hooks. So when you are retrieving this, it dives down, it hits cover. You're going to let it back itself out of the snag, generate some slack in the line, twitch it, throw any clinger weeds off of it, and then dive it back down again, okay? You're going to dive it back down again, make contact with the cover, boom, hit, float back up, dive down again, okay? So I just wanted to make sure that you're, the idea here when you're using a crankbait, and that to maybe a lesser extreme here, we don't need to be using our deep diver like the depth rater, but when we're using even a shallow rater, it's the same principle. You're diving it down, you're making contact with the cover, you're utilizing what's really important. A lot of folks forget about this. You're utilizing the buoyancy in that lure, okay, to get itself out of the snag, okay? So real quick here, and I shouldn't say real quick. I've got a bunch more things to cover here, but we're gonna move a little faster now, okay? As we're in 53 minutes, but this is all really important stuff. So picking the right tool for the job. How do you do this? First thing you want to do is assess the thickness of the cover. So how thick it is. This can easily be done by doing what I like to say, just a visual check. Do you see weed tips breaking the surface? Okay, that's a sign that the weeds are probably pretty thick. Use your electronics. If you're scouting water, drive your boat by, drive your recon right by the edge of those weeds with your side imaging and do an analysis using the electronics without even casting. What do the weeds look like? Use lures to test this. We just talked about that. Use a deep diver like the baby depth rater here, okay? Go cast it out and check for weed cover. If you cast out a depth rater and you don't get weeds, you can either assume that the weeds are pretty shallow or they're close to the bottom, or that they're not present. And this can still be done with all sorts of things, not just depth raters, but you could do this with blades and all sorts of things. Lures are tools, guys and gals. You got to pick the right tool for the job. I mentioned this earlier already, but fouled casts have close to a 0% chance of catching fish. So what I'm getting at here is look at the weed cover, and you have to think about what am I working with regard to how thick the cover is, and then pick your lure based on that, okay? So if you have space, let's say, for example, between, I don't know what color, I don't really have blue here, but let's say here's the tips, the weeds are right here. Let's say the surface of the water is right here. If this is the case here, let's say we've got a solid, 1 foot. I mean, that's incredible, right? Let's say you've got 1 foot of distance between the top of the weeds and the surface of the water. wow, do you have... You got a lot of room there. I mean, you can run shallow running crankbaits, you can run blades, spinnerbaits, you can run your topwaters. I mean, you got space to work. But as that space gets crunched, okay, as you lose that space between the top of the weed cover and the surface of the water, you become more limited in what you can throw, okay? When you've got very little space, you start moving from things like a traditional bucktail, like the 700 booker tail with a treble hook. Then you start entering the realm of, the slop master. If I can get this out, it looks like I caught my. Oh boy, I did want to. Oh, I got it. Then you move to somebody listening to this podcast. The audio is going to be like, what the heck was he doing? It sounds awful. Sorry, guys. I was getting my slop master out. You're going to go from a treble hook to a single hook, even with a trailer. See how these hooks ride up? And they're out of the snag versus a treble hook's going to snag quite a bit. And then when the weeds get really thick and there's no space at all, that's when you go to the Slop Master spoon. You're going to use something that literally is weedless. So the Slop Master spoon can go, this is again that hot perch color, a brand new color for the 2025 JBO lineup. Or you're going to go with something like the old Top Raider here, okay? So this is when you got no space. It is a natural progression from lures that can, with more hooks, to lures with less hooks, to lures that literally ride on the surface, right? So you're kind of just gauging that weed cover and picking the tool that gets the job done, okay? I'm going to cover a couple things here as far as important things. And then I believe I'm going to have to go because my most amazing, wonderful, beautiful wife, Stephanie, has, I think, we got dinner going. So I do have to sneak out here and eat dinner before it gets too late. So I'm going to hit a couple things here. When you're fishing bucktails and spinnerbaits and weed cover, I covered this in a recent episode, okay? I think it was episode 45, season 7, was talking about blades and fishing blades and heavy cover. You need to make sure that the timing, engaging the reel handle, thumbing the spool, and allowing the lure, when the lure hits the water, you are cranking that blade, okay? So casting fundamentals really important. When you're fishing blades in weed cover, you've got to make sure that blade is spinning. One of my ultimate pet peeves as a guide, and I will get on your butt as a client, kindly, is when folks cast their bucktail in, bloop, and then it sinks, and then they finally engage that reel handle, and at that point, almost every single time, the cast is worth nothing. You're getting a workout. Blades, Slop Master, these are search baits. You're generally plugging and chugging with them. You can do the slow roll if you've got space between the weed tips and the water surface, okay? But use your speed control to trigger strikes. Use your speed control to vary their depth that they're running, right? If you've got very little space here, you're going to want to move this thing a little faster. Keep your rod tip up. Or, if you want to keep a slower speed, go to a single hook spinnerbait if you don't have as much space, or if you need reduce speed, okay? Burst your blades to get through the cover, okay? Resist the urge to do this. Every time you hit a weed, oh! I get folks that think every time their blade hits a weed, and again, this is just an experience thing. You're here to learn. I'm not trying to razz you, but you got folks that every time they hit a weed, I tell them they'd be great for TV. Every time they hit a weed, oh, there she is. Nope, I think that was a weed. Oh, that was a weed. It's like every time they're hammering the hook on weeds. Burst it. Use the reel handles to burst that blade through the cover, not rip it with the rod tip unless you're in a really dire situation, okay? Larger blades seem to go through weed cover better. Double blades seem to go through the weed cover better. It pushes more water and it creates that almost like a vacuum when that lure is going through there. it really, works it makes it go through quite a bit easier. Crankbaits, we talked about this. Crankbaits and weed cover, when it, crankbaits and weeds go together like peanut butter and jelly. I've said that before, but boy, when it comes to either the baby depth raider or the baby shallow raider or any of these crankbaits, whether you're throwing the mag shallow raider, click and tick, make contact with the cover. The old, the idea that I like to think about is get into the house and get out safe. Knock on the door. Knocking on the door means you're clicking and ticking, you're touching the weed cover. But then after you're done knocking on the door, get out of there. If they don't answer the door, get out of there and get out of there clean so you can get to the figure eight and not have an issue there. I already talked about the hybrid theory there. And of course, fishing topwater, the last thing we're going to cover here is, when you're fishing topwater and weed cover, there's not a lot to it. The biggest thing when I would say when you're fishing topwater over weed cover is first, it's a boat control issue, whether you're in the edge or the flat. There's not a ton of technique that goes into sometimes fishing a topwater, more so or not, or whatever the saying is there. I don't know what I just said, but the important thing is speed control. Like I just talked about with the blade, speed control with your lure, right? How many people, you give a top raider to and it's way too fast, or it's way too slow, right? You gotta let the muskies tell you, mix it up, work with your speed. There is a special on the water episode where I talk about taking the treble hook off of this, okay? So there you have it, guys. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. I certainly have. There's quite a bit to, fishing weed cover. In this video, I wanted to cover the 101 for you in this, in this segment. And there was some, weed cover 225. Maybe there was a weed cover 324 in there. I don't know. There were a couple advanced tactics we talked about. But the bottom line is everybody can take something from this conversation tonight. Everybody can take something from this conversation. It's a very, very, it's a universal language for musky anglers and, sport fishing anglers alike. Everybody's fishing weed cover, no matter if you're fishing in California to New York to New Mexico to our, pristine waters here in northern Wisconsin. It's something that everybody needs to know how to do and needs to know how to do well, because you're going to be fishing water with weeds, your whole life, your whole career. So getting good at it and continuing to hone your skills, whether it's flats fishing or edge fishing, or whether it's working crankbaits and weeds, maybe that's something new for you this season, or maybe you don't throw spinnerbaits and weeds, or maybe all you do is throw blades and you get hung up all the time. Think about some of the things I've talked about in this episode, and hopefully this will help you catch more muskies. That's the whole point of this whiteboard vlog series. I hope that it helps you catch more muskies, and I hope that it helps me catch more muskies as well, as I'm able to reflect on these things and think about my approach as well. So with that said, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on this whiteboard vlog. Thank you to our sponsors here, Joe Bucher Outdoors, Recon Boats, Great Lakes Potato Chips, and the one and only Crow Rock Lodge on Lake of the Woods in the beautiful Sunset Country in Ontario. Thank you to our wonderful, wonderful sponsors for making this production possible. We couldn't do it without them. So with that said, everybody, thank you so much for watching and listening. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.